Hey folks, this is your second video in this section, section 2.6, talking about function operations and composition. I'd like to focus for a few minutes on domain. We've learned how to find domain if you're looking at a graph, but how do you find domain if you don't have a graph? So you need to learn to ask yourself two different questions. The first question you're going to ask yourself is, do you have a denominator that has a variable? So obviously you're going to answer this question with a yes or no. If your answer is no, then automatically your domain is going to be negative infinity to positive infinity, unless of course you're dealing with question number 2, which we'll deal with in just a moment. If you do have a variable on the bottom, you remember that the bottom cannot equal 0. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set it up this way. We're going to take the bottom, we're going to set it not equal to 0, and then we'll just simply solve for x. Like it's a normal equation, only it's a non-equation because it's not equal. The second question you want to learn to ask yourself is, do you have an even root, a square root, a fourth root, a sixth root, etc.? Again, if the answer to that question is no, then your domain is negative infinity to positive infinity as long as you don't have a variable on bottom. So what you're going to do is remember that the inside of a square root, because that's the one that we're the most comfortable with, the inside of a square root has to always either be positive or equal to 0. You cannot have negatives under a square root. So what we're going to do then is we're going to take the inside of the square root, we're going to make it greater than or equal to 0, that's positive or equal to 0, and then we're going to solve for x. This is going to help us to get the domain when I don't have a graph. Now, I want to point out one more thing in the notes. So if you would go down to the introduction to composition. Did I pass it? So composition, I just wanted to show you how to write it in a better way. Notice that composition uses this open circle notation. The way that we read that is f of g. This one here is read f of g of x. The best way to write these two is to write it using brackets. So we would still read this f of g of x. So just wanted to point out an easier way to write that. We'll do some examples in class.